One of the things that he used to do on Big Bang Theory was Sheldon never got when people were being sarcastic to him. And that's part of my own journey. But people will say things to me and I'll go, well, excuse me, but that's not correct. You know, I'm a teenager in the 70s and no one says neuroatypical, they say, let's beat him up. It was a different approach.
I'm Mayim Bialik, and welcome to my breakdown. This is the place where we break down the things that make us break down.
It's Mayim Bialik's breakdown. She's gonna break it down for you. She's got a neuroscience PhD or two. Fun fiction, and now she's gonna break down. It's a breakdown. She's gonna break it down.
Let's talk about this episode, which is a very big surprise. Surprise!
Big surprise.
When we start, I say like, hi, I'm Mayim Bialik. Oh, I don't say hi. I'm Mayim Bialik. Welcome to my breakdown. This is the place where we break down the things that make you break down. Today we're breaking down, but I didn't say that today.
You didn't?
Because I didn't really even know what was going to happen. I thought we were doing an episode about obsessive compulsive disorder, and I was going to talk to Bill Prady, the co-creator of Big Bang Theory, about how he developed the Sheldon character and all those kind of quirks, and do these characters have diagnoses? And what happened was we started talking to Bill Prady, and it just became this really, really fascinating conversation about him being a person who is on the autism spectrum. And it's not something I've heard him speak about that explicitly, but he wanted to talk about it. And we ended up talking about sensory overload and sensory sensitivity, like people who are sensitive to lots of sounds and even visual input. I'm one of them. It's an amazing conversation.
He talked about the inspiration for the Sheldon character.
Very specific inspiration, really, for the entire Big Bang show. I've never heard those stories. Let me introduce you to my co-pilot. He'll steal your heart and your citizenship, Jonathan Cohen.
Hi, Mayim.
Our neighbor from the north. Jonathan, what do you have to say this morning?
Most of the time I'm failing, but today I'm going to succeed by suggesting that people subscribe to the podcast.
Please do.
Write us a great review and recommend us to a friend. Also, if you're listening to the audio version of this, try checking out Mayim's YouTube channel.
Mostly to see what matching outfits we wear.
Today we're in matching t-shirts.
Today we're in matching t-shirts for the company that Jonathan is.
That is true. Lodic.ai. Shameless plug.
Shameful, really. We have a website associated with this podcast, Bialik, breakdown.com.
There is a section there called Ask Mayim Anything.
The Ask Mayim Anything section of the website is actually for people to ask anything they want, and I will answer it on the air. You can ask about mental health and mental wellness, which really includes just about anything you experience. Like, don't be like, I don't have anything to ask her. You do. You do.
Exercise, diet, sleep, clinical diagnosis.
Sex.
Our brains, our bodies, everything is fair game.
Relationships.
And if you feel uncomfortable, you can ask for a friend.
I feel uncomfortable. Oh, you mean with asking on camera?
Correct.
Right. Okay. Let's do the word of the day. Word of the day.
The word of the day comes from the episode today.
What's the word of the day, Jonathan?
So I'm going to surprise you with the word of the day because it's almost less a word and more a collection of words, which is neuroatypical.
Oh, neuroatypical is a fancy term.
For Mayim Bialik.
Neuroatypical is a phrase that is used as a much nicer way than we used to talk about people whose brains function differently than, quote, most people. And, you know, when I was a kid, there was the special ed class, and a lot of kids were grouped with children who did have, often very profound developmental or psychiatric disorders. But a lot of individuals were grouped with those kids who simply had different ways of learning, and our school systems really didn't know how to handle a lot of those kids who learned and behaved differently. Neuroatypical is often used to discuss the autism spectrum disorders. Asperger's is something that now is called part of the autism spectrum, but that's what we talk about. We also talk about the general forms of neuroatypical development can be even differences in when children speak. My children were both very, very late speakers, and no, it's not because I breastfed them that long.
They didn't have what to speak about. They were
That's right.
constantly attached.
They were constantly happy and attached, and nothing was wrong. There's a joke that there's a kid who doesn't speak, and one day he's 5 years old, and he says to his mother, "This soup is cold." And his parents are like, "Oh, he spoke. Like what? How did he? What's been going on all these years?" He said, "Well, up till now, everything's been pretty much okay, but the soup was cold." Anyway, so neuroatypical can refer to even things like that. Just different from the norm. It's a progressive term, and it's a way to not say those other words that we don't say anymore. Developmental delay is still used. I did work in the field of mental retardation, but that phrase is really only used in a clinical setting. We don't use that word otherwise.
So I want to clarify here that people who are neuroatypical, and I'm going to confess here that I am one of those people, it is not always a negative terminology.
Correct.
It just means that you do not fit within the system. You learn in a different way. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to give a shout out to two other podcasts, Eric Weinstein and Andrew Yang, who both speak a lot about neuroatypicality, if that's a word, and how some of our greatest innovation comes from people who are outside of the box, who push the envelope.
This podcast came from the innovation of you.
And we'll go into potentially a longer story.
People are like, that's not a good use of his neuroatypicalness.
Well, we'll see if they like it and if they subscribe and recommend it to a friend. But until that time, we won't go too deep into this, but we will do a episode at some point about more in depth about neuroatypicality.
Sure.
But it came up in our episode today with Bill.
He's a delightful person to listen to. He's a great storyteller, and he's had a very interesting life. Even just the story about the structure of his childhood, it's very interesting. I literally had a whole thing written, pages and pages about OCD. It's so fascinating. Oh, your thesis was on OCD? Yes, Jonathan, I wrote an entire thesis about OCD. We'll use it for another episode. We don't need it because Bill Prady created his own episode. So I think that's all I have to say.
Let's listen.
Let's listen. Break it down. Bill, hi.
Hi, Mayim.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome to my breakdown, which is really why we called it Mayim Bialik's Breakdown. So I could say, welcome to my breakdown. Bill Prady, you are one of the co-creators of a little show called The Big Bang Theory, which is how we met, among other illustrative credits. Were you a computer programmer in a?
I was a computer programmer
in a previous iteration.
Yes.
You also worked for Jim Henson.
That's where I started writing.
Right. And what were the Muppets things that you did that we would know? I think that you did things that I absolutely know.
I think, my favorite thing that I did, a bunch of stuff. My favorite thing was the Muppet 3D movie that played at the Disney theme parks. I think it still plays in Florida. It doesn't play in California anymore, but it was on for 30 years.
Awesome. Okay, so I was right. There was a Henson connection that is close to me. So why did I bring you on to discuss OCD? People might be wondering. Well, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on any podcast I ever would do is because you are absolutely one of the most globally knowledgeable people that I have ever met. And I've met a lot of knowledgeable men. But you are one of those people who knows not just a little bit about everything. Like you know a lot about a lot of things, and you excel, at things close to your heart, but you also excel at really a broad kind of swath of knowledge. What I wanted to say about you, which I'll say in front of you, is that you're incredibly articulate, as I stutter over how articulate you are. And I remember during Big Bang Theory, you had a very, very scary migraine, and it sent you to the hospital, I believe. And what happened was you were telling me about it because I'm, the resident brain person, and you said that they asked you to describe the pain because that's something, doctors do. And you said that you described it as, this is how you said it, fascinating. And I just loved the image of Bill Prady in the ER. And when they said to him, describe the pain, he said, fascinating. So you're a delight to know and to have gotten to work with, and I've learned so much from you. Obviously, you've also done many other things besides The Big Bang Theory. You wrote on Gilmore Girls. You produced Gilmore Girls
for a year.
Okay,
Yeah.
Dharma and Greg.
Yeah, for its whole run.
Married with Children.
One episode. That was my first episode
because it's
of
in your
broadcast
bio.
television.
It's in your bio, and so I figured I should mention it.
Okay. Yeah. No. But it was my first produced episode of broadcast television.
Oh, that's awesome. Blossom filmed next to Married with Children at Sunset Gower, but I think it was probably in years after you probably had been there. So anyway, you were awarded NASA's Exceptional Public Achievement Medal, correct, in 2013. An asteroid has been designated 8630 Bill Prady in your honor. And you're also an adjunct faculty member, correct, at USC?
At USC.
Anything else special that you'd like me to say about you?
I think you've really summed me up.
Okay, great. Great.
Yeah.
Also, he's exceptional at guessing what size pants people wear.
He is absolutely exceptional at Jonathan, can you stand up?
It's hard. It's hard to
but
do.
I'm curious.
I'll try.
Can you do it remotely?
I'll try.
I'm gonna.
I should. The background is that my first job was I sold suits, and
like you do.
And like you do, I worked at a clothing store. I sold suits, and there was an old guy who'd been there for 1,000 years, and he taught me things. He said, "Kid, I'm going to teach you how to sell suits." And he said, one thing is when a customer walks in, if the first jacket you put on him doesn't look good, you're not going to make the sale. You've got one shot that he's got to put on that first jacket. And what you do is you get the most expensive jacket in the store and you say, well, I'm just going to put this on for size, right? Because you want him to love it. He says, but you got one shot at it. So he said, when you see the customer coming in, you've got to size him so that by the time he gets to the back of the store where you are, you know his size. And so we did this all day, every day, and I would size people. So I've never tried this, Jonathan,
I'm just
over the internet. I don't know if he's going to be able to see from the camera angle.
The only thing I'm going to ask is I will ask you how tall you are so I have a sense of scale.
This is a tall Cohen.
Not tall enough to be a basketball player.
Well, okay, but in
6'2",
some measure,
6'2". Hold on.
It feels like 6'4". It's taller than 6'2".
I mean, it's hard also because of this camera angle.
I
have a lot of arms.
This is
Jonathan,
really
take
hard
your shirt
to do
off.
over the internet. but I'm going to say your suit size is a 44 long.
42. Although I never wear a suit, so maybe I'm wrong.
Okay, and I would say that I'm now going to guess that your pants are a 34, 36.
Is also very close. I'm very thin though, so it's
33, 36?
33, 34.
Yeah.
Over the internet, that was pretty good.
You're at a low camera angle. It's distorted view. You're
not going to size my pants? I'm boyish.
Well, see, I never sold women's pants, and ladies,
I wear men's pants. I don't even wear women's pants.
Well, Mayim, I'm going to
5'4".
say that you probably get you probably pick up a 33 men's pants.
I actually like a 32, but you know what?
Okay.
Post that second child, you could be right. I've worn Jonathan's pants.
Yeah.
What we just also revealed is that we're both in sweatpants.
And I've worn your pants. Okay, back to the podcast. So, Bill, let's talk. You are from Detroit.
Yes.
I think you're one of the only people I know from Detroit. Just so we can kind of position you in the universe, tell us just a little bit about sort of like how you grew up, what'd your folks do, what were you like as a kid?
Annoying. Let's see. I was born in Detroit in 1960, which is a long time ago. And by the way, and this will, I'm going to say this is a random fact, but later it will be pertinent. I was born under one of the rarest U.S. flags that has existed, the 49-star U.S. flag, which was the U.S. flag from July 4th, 1959 to July 4th, 1960.
It's very special.
And let's see, my dad, when he was young, he was a newspaper man. He was a reporter, and then after that, he was an advertising man and that's what I knew him as. My mother was a receptionist at a synagogue, and I can distinctly remember, old enough that when she had that job, she had an old-fashioned switchboard with plugs. And I would go visit her, and she would be talking to me, but the phone would ring. So my whole childhood, she was punctuated by Shalom, Share Tzedek. I'll connect you. So that's my memory of. My parents are still alive, but that's my memory of my mother from my childhood. I was a really nerdy child, just uncomfortably so, and socially awkward. It isn't. My personal journey, I don't discover until we're doing Big Bang Theory, when we have a lot of conversations about being neuroatypical. It's not until then that I discover that I'm what used to be called Asperger's and now is called autism spectrum. Although when I say that to people say to me, yeah. One of the things that we used to do on Big Bang Theory was Sheldon never got when people were being sarcastic to him. And it was always a surprise because he was a very sarcastic person when he spoke. And that's part of my own journey where some, I'm very sarcastic. It's, one of my favorite go-to kinds of humor. But people will say things to me and I'll go, well, excuse me, but that's not correct, with no understanding that they're joking. And so it gave me this odd outsider thing, which I think is why I became a writer. I think that, a lot of paying attention to people and trying to figure out why people do what they do, and that you spend your days listening carefully and watching behavior, and I truly believe writing came out of that. But as a child, it was I'm a teenager in the 70s, and no one says. In neuroatypical, they say, let's beat him up. It was a different approach. It was a culturally a different approach.
This episode is brought to you today by BetterHelp Online Counseling.
One of the scariest things about asking for help is how to get connected to a therapist. It can take a lot of time, and it can just be very intimidating. BetterHelp makes it doable. You fill out a questionnaire, they assess your needs, and you get matched with a counselor in under 48 hours. It's online, licensed professional therapists who can help you with anxiety, depression, anger, grief, sleep problems, relationship problems, LGBTQ concerns. Everything you share is confidential. If you're unhappy with who they matched you with, at no additional charge, you can be matched with someone else. 1 million plus people have taken charge of their mental health with the help of an experienced BetterHelp counselor. You can be one of those people. Jonathan, what do they do?
Users get 10% off by using the code BREAK, BREAK. Get started today at betterhelp.com/break. There's no shame in asking for help. This episode is brought to you by Dame. Mayim, did you know that women are 4 times more likely than men to say that the sex that they are having is not at all enjoyable in the last year?
I've been that woman. Dame Products are looking to change that. This is a company founded by women, and they call them toys for sex. They close the pleasure gap. Men shouldn't be the only ones.
You got to close the gap.
Close the gap. It's very, very important to close that gap, to know your body, to know how you feel good so other people can help you feel good. It's something that takes often many, many years to learn. And Dame products are developed and tested by real people with vulvas in their labs, and they're engineered to bring your solo and coupled play to new heights. They make the world happier one vagina at a time. They have products like Arc, which is a G-spot vibrator that allows you to discover your perfect spot. It's a very important thing to know about, I promise. After launching in January 2020, it sold out in just 72 hours. People were like, must have it now. must have it now. Don't forget the Eva 2. That's a wearable, think about it, wearable, hands-free, external vibrator for couples. I might use it by myself, just saying. The flexible wings on Eva 2, they're smaller, they're lighter. They hold it in place. Why, Jonathan?
So that your hands are free to roam. It's designed to provide clitoral stimulation during penetrative sex.
That's not a sentence I've ever heard you say. Dame, cultivating pleasure to enrich well-being. Get 15% off site-wide. Go to
dameproducts.com/breakdown.
I'm going to come clean here. I'm a neuroscientist, and I actually have never really thought of you the way you describe yourself, obviously, because I've always said you're my people. Obviously, we talk about a spectrum, but to be honest with you, I think of so many other aspects of many of the characters of Big Bang, as more kind of, quote, classical, Asperger's or classical, what we talk about with autism spectrum disorder. But what does distinguish you from a lot of sort of, I think, people's stereotypes, about, quote, those kind of people, is you do have remarkable social ability. And, when I have social anxiety, I have a very hard time going places and being places and being seen, which has nothing to do with being a performer, because I'm paid to take someone else's words and make you believe that they're true. I'm not paid to go to parties, and I'm not paid to look good in 4-inch heels, and I'm not paid to be a size 2. Like, that's not, but that's a lot of what I have to do. So you and Eric Kaplan also, were really the two people who I knew that it makes me emotional, because if I could find you at a party, I knew that I could be okay. And, I really, really appreciated my time with my fellow actors. But really, Jim and I were the only ones, I think, who I really related to in this way. And he often didn't go to things because he was this way. So, I always said, like, if you were to meet my favorite writers, my favorite producers of Big Bang, they seem a lot more like people than writers, And I think that's why, because you have this, a flavor of someone who, has really kind of gotten to the other side of a lot of things that I feel like I haven't. And, I feel like you can talk to anyone in a room. You have a lot more ability, I think. And I wonder, did you have an experience as a child or as a teenager of saying, like, there is success for me socially? Or did it come later?
So it came very late.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you've also talked about how, like, coming of age in a time when, like, everyone was cool and doing drugs and sexy. And you were, like, so just, like, cerebral and, getting your head around so many other aspects of existing. So talk a little bit about that.
Well, good God, if I could have come of age during what we depicted on Big Bang Theory. One of the reasons I think that Big Bang Theory was successful is we caught the zeitgeist. We caught this change from, a single set of social success markers, right? There was a very limited set of social success markers that existed. And then all of a sudden, and I think this has to do with the fragmenting of media, that people no longer sat in one room and consumed one television show at the same time, but people sought out their own things. So this celebration of individuality is what really came to be during I'd say the last 15 years or so, but not when I was a kid. And I dropped out of college when I was 19. I'd graduated high school very young. I was 16 when I graduated high school, and I couldn't have been less prepared for the world. And I dropped out of college when I was 19. Wayne State University in Detroit, Michigan. They list me as an alumni. It's very generous. They gave me an alumni award, and I said, I think technically this is the first time this award's been given to a current student. And by the way, I have angled for an honorary degree from Wayne State.
I've heard you.
They haven't come up with it. But when I was 19, I had a girlfriend who was my girlfriend because she went and announced, "I'm your girlfriend," and I went, "Okay, that seems fine." And she wanted to move to New York, and so we moved to New York, and we broke up. I think I was 25, and now I was living in New York, single, and I was working at the Muppets at the time, and I just remember being beyond lonely. I was, when I was at work, it was lovely, but then I would go home and I was just beyond lonely. And I was faced with a choice, and the choice was either figure out how to function socially or just commit to getting out of the subway, buying a piece of pizza, renting a Blockbuster, and going home, and that would be my night every night. And it was very hard because this is New York City in 1985, and so what's social? Is social, going to some club where it's loud and I experience sensory overload and I can't talk to people and things like that. I wrote a pilot about this. That was never produced. That was based on this time in my life, and I thought I wanted to meet a woman. I wanted to have a girlfriend. And I thought, I'm never going to meet a woman at a bar. That's not my world, and I'm not going to meet somebody at a disco. Where would I meet a woman? I would meet a woman at a bookstore. That would be how I would meet a woman. So I would have these days, which in retrospect I call bookstore Saturdays, where I would spend about 2 hours trying to figure out what to wear that would in some way suggest that I was, a desirable human being. And I would go to a bookstore and I would spend 2 or 3 hours at that bookstore. And it took me years to realize that not ever speaking to anyone, not that my plan would have worked, but never speaking to a single human being while I was there was not a pathway for success on that particular route. I had to figure it out. And it's interesting because, a lot of especially in the early years of Big Bang, Big Bang is a wonderful collaborative effort. And as time went on, there were so many voices that contributed so much, Steve Milaro in particular. But very early on, a lot of things were drawn from my really painful experiences socially.
Oh, wait, you're getting ahead of me. It's like specifically a question. So before we get into the Big Bang of it all, I do want to ask you, we share a heritage, you and I, and we've also shared many stories, competing stories about our moms. Without, getting overly personal, was there, what was sort of the mental health environment that you would say you were raised in?
You know what? Let's, given that my family are all alive, although I don't know how internet savvy they are, complicated.
Yeah.
They're very, very, very complicated. The sort of defining event of my childhood was the death of my grandfather. The most classic Eastern European immigration story to the United States. And there was a family that in the 40s and 50s, there was sort of a mutual investment society, and the patriarch of this was my father's father, my grandfather. And he lived life as a very, very big man. And when he died, it was apparent that it had all been a lie. That he had maintained this this image of this very successful real estate entrepreneur, and what he was kind of a broke slumlord. Oh. And my father, it hit my father hard because the central mythology of our family was that, we were the heirs to this great legacy. And, I think, it shattered our family in remarkable way. And it certainly rocked my dad's perception of the world. And so, we all have the experience. Everybody at some point in their life will realize their parents are human and that they are flawed in some way. But for me, it happened when I was 12. And it was just overwhelming. And, part of the reason that I was very lost when I was young was that the household was focused on trying to manage this crisis for years. So when it came time for me, this bright Jewish kid who went to a prep school, to start looking at colleges and things like that, nobody was doing it. Nobody was saying we should tour colleges. Nobody was saying we should do anything. So ultimately, after I graduated, because I was young, and I worked for a year for Radio Shack, and then on my own, I went. I applied and went to Wayne State because it was local. Because the notion of going away to college, I couldn't even figure out how we would accomplish that. I think fundamentally, I was a person who needed help in functioning in the world, and my family didn't provide it. When I look at my own history, it probably isn't really until my mid-20s that I managed to assemble a group of friends around me that functions as a family to help me finish growing up.
Yeah. And I mean, first of all, it's an amazing story. And also, I only know the Bill Prady that I know. So when I get to learn these little tidbits, it makes it even more incredible to me, where you've gone, and once you got out of that part of your world and your life, the adventures, that you have had. And, I've gotten to see your children go from little ones to, a young woman and a young man. And you have a whole other life here and so many amazing things about you. So it's really beautiful to learn other things about you. When I started on Big Bang Theory, it was the season finale of season 3. And I met you before I met Chuck Lorre, and you obviously co-created the show, and you were both executive producers. I have tremendous, tremendous respect for Chuck Lorre, and the two of you gave me my life. You gave me an adult existence. I was a neuroscience doctoral student with a nursing infant and a just weaned toddler, and I was planning on, making $20 an hour teaching Hebrew and piano for the rest of my life. So the two of you really are, you're the next level of parent for me. And I will say, I don't really know that I know Chuck Lorre, but I do feel like I got to know you. And, the two of you created this show, and the story that we were told, the story that I was told coming in, I had never seen The Big Bang Theory. I was busy nursing humans and watching sci-fi movies. But the story that I was told was that Chuck's the one who's the Hollywood one, and Bill's the real geek who's also the Hollywood one. It sounds like that is about accurate, especially because you revolved in a computer science, a computer programming kind of place. And, when I was told that they were looking for a female Sheldon Cooper, I had no idea who that was. And I Googled Sheldon Cooper, and I watched, 10 seconds of Jim Parsons in character. And I was like, oh, I know people like that. I can do this. I went to neuroscience grad school, and I'm arguably either, I think this could be said about you, either the most fascinating person in the room or the most annoying person in the room, and sometimes I'm both. And I literally was like, I'm a mimic, so I was like, I can mimic Jim Parsons as a girl version, but what ended up becoming my home, for 10 years was the place where I got to be on a show about people like me. I play Dungeons and Dragons. I grew up in comic book stores and record stores. I like things other people don't like. I understand things other people don't understand. And I want to connect on a level that many people don't. And that's why you were my person, because you got it. And it meant a lot to me. I was coming onto a show with people who had all been working together for years. They were all very famous. I was someone who was a child actor who left the industry, who whatever, had 2 kids and was, pumping on brakes. And so to get to be part of this world with you and observe was really, really an exceptional opportunity. But I guess I'm curious, when you started, designing these characters, I do want to know what it was like, because I'm curious if there was like a notion of, this one should look like OCD. This one should look like classic neurosis. This one should look like social anxiety. This is, autism spectrum. Was it that, or was it an evolution? Like, what was it like?
I've talked about this many times in interviews, because people will say, the most asked question, and not to say it's never asked the way you just asked it, but they'd say, tell us the origins or the beginning, of this. And I'd known Chuck Lorre for years, and I'd met him during the pilot of Dharma and Greg. And this is a very interesting thing, and this sort of goes to, I'll tell this story because it goes to my social cluelessness, my fundamental cluelessness. So Dharma and Greg was co-created by Dottie Zicklin, then Dottie Dartland, and Chuck Lorre, and we Dottie and I knew each other, and she said, I'm working on this pilot, and I'm working with Chuck Lorre, and we're kind of at loggerheads about something. And what I'd like to do, if you're available, is to bring you into the process and have you help. Now, any person with like an ounce of social comprehension would hear, I'm in a dispute with somebody. I want to bring you in because I need an ally. I hear things literally. I need your help. What's help? Help is making the best TV show possible. So she convinces Chuck to hire me to work on the pilot with them. I get there, and by the second day, I've listened to both pitches, and I like Chuck's better. and I say, well, that's the right way to go. And I never understood, it's some years later, Dottie said, how could you have done that? I brought you in to be my ally. And I said, but I don't understand. It's Spock. The Task at Hand was the best television show. I evaluated the various options, and I chose the one that I believed would make the best television show. It's just what we do here on the planet Vulcan. And so I knew Chuck Lorre, and now, many years go by, and we're going to develop a pilot. And we explore a whole bunch of ideas, and then I start talking about a specific group of people I knew. And they're the people who worked in, when I moved to New York, I was a salesman at Radio Shack, and I met a fellow named Howard Wolowitz, not just a coincidence. And he was developing software for personal computers were new. They were brand new, and he was developing software. He had started a little software company, and I left my job at Radio Shack, and I went to work with him. And we have this tiny little software company, and we had offices on 41st Street, and we wrote software. And it was a very odd group of people. So when Chuck and I were talking, I started to describe this group of people. And I describe, in retrospect, we know what they are. But at the time, they were just who they are. So I described a person who worked in our office who was a mathematical savant. Computer software, the way we were writing it was one of the things you had to often use is base 16 instead of base 10 math, hexadecimal. There were two ways to convert decimal to hexadecimal. One was to hunt in the office for that stupid HP calculator that everybody kept losing. Or you could just shout across the room at Ken. And you could say, what's 191 in hex? And he would tell you, and then you would go back to your work, and he would do it in his head. But Ken couldn't calculate a tip in a restaurant. Jonathan, I'll let you puzzle through it. What is the formula in the United States, if somebody were coming to this country and unfamiliar with American tipping, and they said, how much do I tip in a restaurant? What would you say?
15 to 20%. 25% if it's
Used to be
some
10.
of some of the people on The Big Bang.
But 50, but 15 to 20%.
Yeah.
Right? Based on,
Your personal preference based on service.
there you go. So we would go to a restaurant and we would say, can you leave the tip? And he'd say, I don't know how much to leave. And we'd say it's 15 to 20% based on quality of service. And he would say, how do I evaluate that? Is it the speed with which the food came out? Well, no, that could be the kitchen. Is it the waiter's demeanor? Well, that could be genuine or it could be disingenuous. They could be angling for a tip. And we said to him, why don't you split the difference and leave 17.5% every time? And he said, that's the worst option, mathematically. And we said, why is that the worst option? And he said, because logically it's more likely that service is good or bad. The probability that service is exactly middling is infinitesimally small. Therefore, if each time I tip 17.5%, I can guarantee with near certainty that I am over or under tipping. And I told that story to Chuck, and Chuck said, well, we've never seen that guy on TV. I started talking about other people, and these were people who had all come up with coping mechanisms for their social deficits. So here's an actual conversation that I heard, and I'll never forget this. It's a conversation between two of the programmers. And one of them says, I'm really worried. I'm invited to a party tonight, and people tell me I stay too long at parties. I don't know when to leave. And the other programmer said, I used to have this problem, but there's a formula.
Stop it. Stop.
What's the formula? And he said, it's very simple. When you enter the party, count the number of people who are present and assign that value to n. When the number of the people in the party is 0.7 n, leave. And if you stop and think about it, you go, that's correct. If you walked into a party and there were 10 people there, and then at some point the party would grow, and then it would start to shrink, when there were 7 people there, if you left, no one would say you stayed too late. And if you walked into a party and there were 100 people there, and it grew and shrank, and then you left when there were 70, everyone would say you did that right. And so I watched that, and then there was one of the programmers who was, as they say in Hamilton, very successful with the ladies, and he would bring girlfriends around on a regular basis, and this was the most astonishing variety of people that you had seen. He would bring women in who were models. He would bring women in who looked like somebody's mother. He would, and at one point we said to him, "What is going on?" And I think somebody may have phrased it as, "What's your secret?" Because he seemed very romantically successful. And he said, "It's simple. I have two rules." "What are your rules?" "Proposition every woman." "Have no standards." And you go, well, of course, from a mathematical point of view, that is an absolute formula for success. By the way, that sentence was the early foundation for the Howard character on Big Bang Theory. Mm-hmm. That was, it's an interesting thing, and I think you can look back on work and you can say, you can talk about aspects of it being more or less successful, and you can also talk about, we've lived through a period of great evolution sociologically, and a really wonderful one about how people are treated and how people should be respected. And we're now going back 15 years to the origin of Big Bang Theory, and I think that there's a lot about how we depicted Howard's character that maybe now we might not do in the same way. At the same time, what came off as really desperate and kind of misogynistic behavior on his part stemmed from a desire to be loved, a desperate desire on his part to be loved, and his belief that this was a pathway to that. And all of these characters were using, and this was the fundamental thing for me about Big Bang Theory and its conception. They were trying to use intellect, logic, and reasoning as a substitute for social proficiency, because they weren't naturally socially proficient. So they would try to use intellect and reason to replace that. And it's a lousy replacement. It's a terrible replacement. It just doesn't work. This connected to me and connected to my time in New York in my mid-20s, for true or not, the way my self-image, and this is based a great deal on, what my mother told me I was. My self-image was centered on being bright. That, oh, well, you're bright. To this day, my mother says, oh, what a lawyer you would have made. And my question was, well, if I'm so bright, if that's true, why am I alone?
Oh, Bill.
Why am I lonely? If I have this understanding of the world, if I have this understanding of the universe, why am I sitting in Brooklyn in my apartment by myself? I don't want to be.
Before I was an actor, before I was famous, I had many, many years before that happened. What I was sent into a world of was, I'm told that I'm the best. Everybody's jealous of me, but I know that's not true because I'm alone. I haven't found people that get me. I'm interested in things that other people aren't interested in. I want to relate on a level that other people don't want to relate on. Something's not lining up. But I guess, I wonder for you, especially in your kind of developing years, where did you find comfort in that kind of, conflict between what you hoped you could be or what your mother hoped you could be and sort of what the reality was? I know for me it was very devastating for many, many years.
Well, I think that it ultimately stopped me. It's interesting because when we tell stories like this, and when we try to, as a writer, to try to explain ourselves as a character, and you go back to some specific things. One of the things that happened to me is my birthday is in June, June 7th. If anyone wants to send anything next year, that'd be nice. But
that's 6-7. That's special. In 1989, it must have felt really good.
That's very good. So the way the cutoff was for school enrollment in those days in Detroit, the cutoff was June 1st. So a June 7th birthday makes you among the youngest in the class. And I entered school knowing how to read. I entered kindergarten knowing how to read, and there was a real thing from my mother, and this really, when you talk about how your mother spoke to you, this repeated message of you're special, you're special, you're special, you're special, you're special. And one of the things was, Billy is just bored in first grade because they're learning how to read and he can read. So in those years, people still double promoted children. They skipped kids a grade. So about a month into first grade, I was moved into a second grade classroom. Well, what this meant was for the rest of my schooling,
you were 2 years younger than everybody.
2 years younger, and so it does a very peculiar thing. First of all, it ruins sports. Mm-hmm. It just that was the end of sports. You're a 9-year-old on a touch football field with 11-year-olds, mm-hmm. and it's awful. And the locker room trauma the locker room trauma of being a little boy in a locker room with teenage boys was awful. It was god awful. By the way, it was even worse because in those days,
Oh, no.
at the beginning of the school year, the Detroit Lions used our high school fields for practice before the season began. So it wasn't just that I was a pre-adolescent sharing a locker room with adolescent boys. I was also sharing a locker room with Rosie Greer and the Detroit Lions. I kid you not.
I was skipped. My brother and I were both skipped because, again, we were these precocious kids, and so then I was not only the youngest, also everyone in my family I was a head shorter than even the shortest kid, and while I distinguish bullying from, kind of a lot of the standard harassment that many children experience, it was very, it was painful and annoying. I was asked if I was premature. I was called Webster. Just.
Sure.
It's funny
Nice.
Now. Wasn't funny then.
So my classmates weren't peers, and it's not socially acceptable to have friends outside your class. That just you're a seventh grader. You hang out with seventh graders. But there was this constant drumbeat from my mother of you're special and all of that. And when I would come home, when I would be around my family, when there were family gatherings, darling, play the piano, mine would be say something smart. And so the accumulation of knowledge, the accumulation of facts seemed to me to be the only thing I could do. That maybe if this is my lane, an expression, by the way, that wouldn't really come into popularity until the 2000s. But if this is my lane, then I'll learn everything I can. I'll acquire all the information I can, because if that's what is going to make me succeed, then let me get to be the best at it. And so this means, among other things, that when I'm 10 years old, I set out to read the World Book Encyclopedia cover to cover. And so I read every volume of the 1968 World Book Encyclopedia, and I can still remember huge chunks of it. And then I have, spectrumy information compulsions. And so that leads down things like flags.
Right. So that was originally when this episode was, going to focus kind of on some of Sheldon's particular quirks. I'm going to list the things that I know about you. So just from Sheldon. So flags is you. So anybody who enjoyed fun with flags, it's really fun with Bill Prady. Trains.
Trains is me a little bit, but much more that came from the son of one of the writers. Who was much more profoundly on the spectrum, and he had a very, very strong train compulsion. Mine is, I think of mine more as sort of comfort, as soothing things. So I can, looking up train routes and knowing the names, knowing where the Sunset Limited and the Pacific Surfliner and the 20th century, knowing where these trains go and the history of them is very soothing to me.
Tell me about that. What is that? Is it a well, I'm asking what it's like for you. Is that a physical sensation? Is it a psychological sensation?
It's a psychological sensation. It's equivalent to collecting. So I'm absolutely a collector, if there's something I can acquire the set of and have all of, I'll walk through the living room and I have a set of Vonnegut novels that was published as a set that has, when you put them in order, there's an illustration on the spines of the book. And that's incredibly satisfying. But what I discovered is that I can acquire knowledge in sets. And it's just the same. So whether that's something like flags or military rank or, anything like that. And there's just something incredibly satisfying.
What else do you like that?
music. So for example, right now I am in an acquisition mode on Coltrane albums, and to make the decision. To make the decision, you know what? I have 4 Coltrane albums. That I could have all the Coltrane albums, especially in a world with eBay. Here's the great collector moment. As a teenager, I was a huge fan of the singer Janice Ian, who's most famous for her biggest song was At 17. Janice was the first musical guest on Saturday Night Live. She's less known now, but because of Big Bang Theory, and one of the great things, the overwhelmingly best thing of Big Bang Theory was the people I got to meet.
Yes.
Beyond anything else, and one of the people I got to meet was Janice Ian,
Who is lovely.
I
mean,
and
I'm not just saying that. She's super, she's everything I wanted her to be for you.
she is a glorious person. In fact, while I'm talking to you guys, texts from Janice Ian are coming
You'll
in.
send my
on
love
my
when you're
screen
off.
right now. I will do that. So Janice and I became friends, and there came a point where she stayed in our guest room here at the house, and actually a number of times. The first time she was here, I have my childhood collection, complete collection of Janice Ian records, vinyl. And I said, Janice, would you sign one of these for me? And she said, sure. And she took one down, and she took a Sharpie, and she signed it. And then she's looking at it, and she looks at it, and she decides to make some fun annotations on it. And it has a picture of the band, and she starts writing call-out captions. This person was this,
Right.
This person was that. And she's having a good time. And then she starts taking the other Janice Ian albums down from the shelf and writing on them. And in my head, it's, stop
Yes.
writing on my collection of Janice Ian albums,
Janice Ian.
Ian.
I love that.
And if there could be a moment that sort of epitomized this, this weird wiring in my brain, that was it. That the desire for my pristine collection to exist in pristine
Right.
form was maybe bigger than the fact that Janice Ian was in my
signing.
house.
This episode is brought to you by Nutrafol.
Thousands of women have already taken back control of their hair with Nutrafol. Many are raving that the supplement not only transformed their hair, but restored their confidence too.
Nutrafol offers 2 targeted formulas for women that are clinically shown to improve hair growth and thickness with less shedding throughout the stages of life.
I am a person who needs this so badly. Like, I'm gonna stop hiding. I've had hair problems literally since I had my first son. You know it, everybody knows it. In a clinical study, 86% of women reported improved hair growth after 6 months. Mine just stopped growing, period. More than 1,500 top doctors recommend Nutrafol as an effective and high-quality solution for healthier hair. It's physician formulated to be 100% drug-free. It is medical-grade botanicals, that's science, in consistently effective dosages so you can get the most reliable results. The idea is to grow thicker, healthier hair, and you can also support our show by going to Nutrafol.com, use the promo code BREAKDOWN, and new customers will get 20% off their subscription. That's the best offer available anywhere.
Plus free shipping on every order. You get 20% off at Nutrafol.com, Nutrafol.com, promo code BREAKDOWN.
I just have a couple more questions for you.
Yeah.
But this leads to a really interesting one. On this podcast, we're talking about all aspects of mental health and mental wellness. But one of the things that Jonathan and I, that's been so important for Jonathan and our personal journeys is understanding what it feels like in your body when something's not right or when something doesn't feel right. And as someone who shares a lot of your atypicalness, I know what it feels like in my body when something's not right. And one of the things that is the most confounding to people who don't understand it or have no experience with it is what it is like to be sensory sensitive. And it is, I have a very, very sensitive startle reflex, and there is a very distinct set of somatic, physiological things that happen to me when my nervous system gets flooded. And some people get flooded by emotions, and some people get flooded by touch, and some people get flooded in particular by sound. I wonder if I just, because you're so articulate, can you describe what it feels like?
Sure, I absolutely can.
Go for it.
Yeah, so I'm misophonic. So somebody chewing, or a rhythmic sound,
Yep.
or a rhythmic sound with slight variation.
Hate it.
A rhythmic sound. So in other words, a faucet that's dripping, and it's a faucet that's dripping where the drips are falling, say once every 2 seconds, but the physics of that is every now and then it'll miss a drip. So, and that re-engages me with the sound, and it's an inability to prioritize. So if I want to trigger this in myself, I can go to Costco. And I can walk into Costco. And I can't quite identify specifically what it is, but part of it is that it's a warehouse and the ceiling is very high.
Oh.
And that
Say it.
It does something to the sound.
Yes.
So if I have to go to Costco, I prepare for it. And the first thing that I do is I take a deep breath and I say to myself, when you go into Costco, you're going to have this experience. So, because part of it is what happens is it'll hit me and I'll go, what's going on? What's going on?
Yeah.
So I'll just remind myself, just in my head. And I have a mantra. I will share with you my insane mantra. This mantra comes from an event. I don't particularly like roller coasters. When I was very young and I was working for Jim Henson, and we were doing a lot of work with the Disney theme parks. And I'm at Disneyland with Jim Henson and Frank Oz, who played Miss Piggy and Yoda and all of that, and a bunch of other people. I'm at Disneyland, and they say, let's go ride Space Mountain. So if you don't like roller coasters and you have sensory issues, an indoor roller coaster.
Forget it. I recently did it, and it does not feel good in my body.
No. So, but I'm with my boss and my boss's boss and all these people. This is happening. And I get on this ride and I begin repeating something to myself, which is my mantra. I repeat to this day in these circumstances. It's lunacy. And it's this sentence. This experience occupies a finite amount of time and it will come to an end.
Oh my God. Say it again.
This experience occupies a finite amount of time and it will come to an end.
Is that a direct translation from the Sanskrit?
It is a direct translation from whatever voice within me said, this will reassure Bill.
So talk about the physical. So what does it feel like physically? Talk about it.
So the first thing that happens is an inability to speak. I can't, something shorts out in the pathway from thought to mouth. And what shorts out is the inability. So when you speak, you kind of are given your brain offers you a palette of things to say very quickly. When somebody asks you a question, your brain in an astonishing bit of processing offers you 10 or 15 responses. You pick one quickly and say it. Well, what happens to me in that moment
Jonathan always picks the one he shouldn't say. Sorry, but that's a different story.
Nevertheless, he picks one.
Correct.
What happens in the moment is that process is paralyzed.
Right.
So somebody asks me a question. I'm aware of different things that I could say, but I can't get the needle to land on one, to drop it into my mouth. So I can't communicate the problem. And then that becomes its own problem. So one of the feelings of this is all of these things trigger their own crises.
Yep.
Right. So there's the initial crisis of what I'm dealing with. And then, oh my God, I can't communicate this. And And then the other thing, then that extends to kind of a paralysis of action. So if I go into Costco and if I haven't made a plan, and by the way, the plan can be anything. The plan can be, I'm going into Costco and I'm just picking up toilet paper. Or the plan can be, I'm going into Costco and I'm going to meander down the aisles and see what I'd like to buy. So it doesn't have to be a concrete plan as long as it's a plan. If I don't have a plan, I will just stand there and then I'll reach a point where I'm standing there with my hands on the shopping cart and I'm not moving.
This, you are describing what happens when I go to any supermarket, and my children used to think it's because mama's famous and she doesn't know how to function in public. But now that they've gotten older, they realize that that's not it. It is too much information coming at me in all the ways. And what I have to do is I have to go down every single aisle, because if not, I have no structure or comfort to the entire experience, meaning I can't do anything.
Right. Now, one of the interesting things to think about, and I know this because my father was in advertising, is supermarkets are an environment with deliberate sensory overload by design. Box copy, and the easiest way to think of it is the cereal aisle, right? So if you look at the colors that are used, and if you look on a box at the color combinations, they're jarring. They're colors that don't belong together. Pick any cereal box and think about painting a room those colors, and you go, oh my God, that would be the worst room to spend time in. It's so jarring. Well, that's to get your brain to stop and look at it. Even people who don't suffer in this fashion, when they're going through they're being pulled in various directions. Well, for somebody who has sensory input control problems, you walk in and it's just lunacy in your brain.
That's what it feels like.
So but I have methods for the supermarket, and one is and things that you would look at and you would say, that's just a helpful tip and everyone should do that. It's not a response to lunacy, but when I do a shopping list, I do it on the computer on a word processor, right? And then I sort it by department. And you say, oh, that's just efficient, right? But no, what it means is, if I put all the produce together and all the baking together and all that stuff, it means that I have a path through the store.
I will one-up you. When I unload my grocery cart, I do it by department.
Perfectly reasonable. And every time, now here's another wonderful thing, is my intrusive thoughts are jokes.
How do I ask God to exchange my intrusive thoughts for yours? Is there a prayer?
My intrusive thoughts are jokes, but they are every time. So every time I unload groceries, I comment to myself, groceries are only called groceries while they're in motion. At the store, they're milk, eggs, and bread. And when you get them home, they're milk, eggs, and bread. But while you're moving them, they're groceries.
I love that. Bill, I thank you so much. I'm gonna have to. I won't ask you back soon, but I could talk to you forever, which is often why we were the 0.3% left at a party. But what I will say, I want to thank you mostly, is that as a writer, you understand how time-consuming it is to write. I had written an entire script structured around this episode, which I can now use for someone who I will have on to talk about that, because you just made your own episode. So thank you.
Oh my goodness.
Thank you for saving a script for me. Thank you so much, Bill. Thank you. What do you think, pant size 33?
He was very good at that.
Well,
I'm impressed.
He's a very, very impressive man.
I should also note that 6'2" is tall enough to play basketball,
No
but
one
only
thinks
for
you're
the
6'3".
select.
Everyone thinks you're 6'3". I say you're 6'3".
Only when looking at me from your height do I look taller.
How about that Bill Prady?
We could talk to him forever.
I might need to.
And I think we should have him back on as soon as we can.
I literally went into that interview thinking, let's talk to Bill about a lot of the OCD features of Sheldon. I didn't want to be that person who was like, was Sheldon autistic? Because that's what everybody asks Bill Prady. And he always says like, well, what's to say with a diagnosis? And then I was going to ask Bill Prady, what's it like hearing feedback from people who say, my kid, my friend, my sibling had never seen someone like them on television, and thank you. We had people say to us that they had never seen a couple, both on the spectrum, and that it gave them hope that their children would find someone, like Amy found Sheldon and Sheldon found Amy. I want to talk to him about all those things, but instead, he shared so many interesting things about him, and just, I knew a lot of those things, but I didn't know them put together, you know?
And I think a lot of people have what he called sensory input control problems, or having sensory overload, but they don't understand that that's what they're experiencing when they're feeling.
I have a much more visceral, like for me, I get, I'll start buzzing and it feels like my insides are rattling, and it sometimes visibly looks like shaking. It's very, very uncomfortable. I have been on Space Mountain and had a proper panic attack as an adult. It is terrifying because there's a closing in feeling. It's terrible. But it was really interesting because he's a much more cognitive person, meaning he's much more cognitive about the process of understanding things. And like, I'm not organized enough to make a spreadsheet for the supermarket because I don't have that. Like, I'm the mad scientist version of him. I don't have that. I have a need for order and I have a need for organization, but I don't have his precision. And of course, the grass is always greener. I wish I had that precision with which to deal with my sensory input issues, my flooding. I want my children specifically to hear this episode because while they know that I'm not the only one like this, it really helps, I think, to have someone else who has that experience share about it. And the thing that I have in place, I literally been to Costco, I think, once in my life. I'm not a Costco person because I get overwhelmed. I can't. No, but there's there's a sound that I'm very sensitive to when like there's any movement. Sometimes it's like the air conditioning. I don't know what it is, but I feel it in my body. It feels like it is in my body and it's unpleasant and I can't get things done. I don't want to. Costco
is the store that has everything you never knew you needed. And the only way to find out what you need is to go down all the aisles. I can't handle a museum that doesn't have a logical path. I love maps, and I love maps. And if I go to a museum, it's kind of like an all or nothing experience. We either do all of it so that I know that I did it, or I don't want to be there. It's very hard. I can't do let's do like when I was married to Mike, and he'd be like, well, let's just do this wing. And I was like, no, that's not an option. I'd rather barely look at anything and say that I went to every single room of a museum rather than only do one wing well. And that's not good. It's not why I got divorced, but I can't imagine it helped. You have said that you don't like the gray, the things
it doesn't like me.
Have you ever, for example, been traveling, you get to a city and you just decide you're going to wander around and see where the day will take you?
No.
That's not something you can do.
I don't do that in my own city. I never see where the day will take me. No, which is not to say I'm not an adventurous person. I mean, I backpacked through not all through Europe, but I backpacked through Paris, took a train to Italy, went to Greece, Cairo, Jerusalem, Israel.
But you mapped out a plan to do that.
Oh, well, it was before the internet and before computers, yeah. But meaning I could go, I'm not, it's not that I'm not fun, is really what my concern is, that everyone's thinking like, she's not fun. But you're absolutely
You're fun
right.
on a list.
I'm fun with a lot of rules around it. But no, like the notion of like, let's wander around. No, but I was also, I was raised by people who were like, here are the 4 fun things that we're going to do today. If we don't do them, this day was a failure.
And I can confirm that you are one of the best list makers I have ever met in my life.
Why, thank you, Jonathan.
Your list making skills
Thank
are second to none.
Bill Prady's a good list maker.
I have not spent enough time with Bill to
He's
compare our
amazing.
list. List.
I'm going to tell you something. After I got divorced, I didn't even have the ovaries, the chutzpah to say this to Bill Prady's face. My mother suggested I date him when he was my boss because she knew how similar we were. It's weird.
I'm emailing him right now. Hold on.
He's engaged to a lovely woman, and she's much cooler than I am.
Not married yet.
Anyway, that was a really, really special episode. Very special to connect with Bill that way. He's a really special man. His mother was right. That's what this episode's called. Bill Prady's mother was right. From my breakdown to the one I hope you never have. We'll see you next time.
It's Mayim Bialik's breakdown. She's gonna break it down for you. She's got a neuroscience PhD or two. One fiction, and now she's gonna break down